Thanks for having me. My name is Patrick Barton. I'm the IT director for the city of Canton. I actually oversee the IT department and all the IT functions related to the city. I can tell you that I have a very high level overview of security. We actually have a few people that deal more in detail with that. But I will do my best to answer any questions or anything that pertains to this discussion.
My name is Andy Hayden. I'm an FBI agent here in Canton, working primarily on cyber crimes, specifically some cyber computer intrusion matters, but we do quite a bit also on a task force that I coordinate, a cybercrime task force for what is becoming increasingly difficult or disturbing on the internet with children and the victimization of kids online and in real life. So it's a child sexual exploitation task force that's done covertly online, but it's also one of the, it actually is the only FBI undercover operation that we are very overt about to tell people that we are out there online. So do a bit of that, both like on the financial side or the cybersecurity side.
Okay, Robert.
Bobby Greco. Merchant Services is a space that I work in. 10 years of doing this locally. I support local Huntington branches all the way up to Cleveland down to Tusk. My specialty is e-commerce as well as any kind of form of electronic payment via telecheck or checks, gift cards, credit cards, and an ever-growing landscape that's constantly changing and evolving. So we approach security on the credit card processing side on a layered approach, and we've got some definite tips that if everybody needs some help with that, I can help you out.
And I'm Bryan, I'm the technology director here at the Stark County District Library. I'm basically responsible for all the technology that's involved in the 10 libraries that we support and the Maston and Louisville public libraries, which we support on a contract basis for some of their services. So I'm involved in all aspects of technology, everything from public computing to this room, to staff computing, to Wi-Fi, and basically providing all of the services technology-wise that the library needs to operate. Also responsible for the website and the iOS, which is the old card catalog, the electronic version. So we get involved in a little bit of everything.
Great, thank you. And once again, thank you guys for being here and sharing your expertise with us, and we really appreciate it. I'm going to start with the first question, and this can go to anybody. What are some of the developing e-security threats that you see right now in your profession, and what are some ways that individuals can protect themselves from some of those developing threats?
I'll take it on the merchant side. When I mentioned layered approach, we are developing and have had several products that we've developed in the past 2 years. I don't know if anybody has heard of PCI. Scans are involved in that, and it's basically scanning the networks to make sure that there is no intrusion points. We also have a product that is called TransArmor. It's being adopted by all the card brands. What it does is it uses VPN Cisco technology, takes that credit card data while it's in flight, turns it into a tokenization number. It opens up on the platform side. We give it an authorization code. We rewrap it with another token number, push that back to the point of contact where that authorization needs to hit. And while it's sitting there, it is a token number. So it's basically useless for anybody that would breach a system because it's not exposing cardholder data. It's actually just a token.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Well, I'm going to say, I think that's a very high-tech thing that I think we have to have on the low-tech side. I think one of the things that people, it's the constant change. I mean, if you've watched the news lately and you see that this place was compromised or that, and they got in a different way, and there's a new, and right now Internet Explorer has got a problem, and how do you make something that's secure that just is constantly changing? How do you be aware? So I think that's a huge issue. It's just something that we all have to be aware of too. It's aware and be safe in what we do.
I can say on the personal side at least, personal meaning those individuals we deal with as opposed to the corporations we deal with. two of the biggest problems in answer to your question are too much curiosity and a little bit of laziness, and I'll explain both. Passwords are killing us in the general public. And I say lazy because people tend to use the same passwords for everything. They never change them. They keep them very safe, utilizing their own names. And many of the intrusions that we run across, and by intrusions I mean, for those that don't know, literally the digital intrusion into one's financial life or personal life or email inboxes, etc. When we run into those, it's because of laziness when it comes to passwords or the reluctance to change those, which we encourage people to do all the time. And the curiosity I mentioned, in answer to your question, was because of email attachments. Email attachments, the American public is online everywhere. They're on the social media, on the Facebook, or on our kids' Instagram accounts. If you're not, you should be, which I am. And looking at all that, it's horrible to be a kid in my family, I can tell you, because I read it all and see it all. But the point is, everyone is curious about the next person, so they're creeping on this account and that account. It is what it is. When we get emails, when we get text messages, not so much text, emails with the attachments, particularly in corporations, and my colleagues can attest to this. They're opening it out of curiosity. What is that? It seems to come from a familiar person. I've never gotten an email attachment from them before, but I'm going to open this one. And you open Pandora's box, and they now have an avenue into your system, whether it be your personal system. So those are the two big problems: passwords and the reluctance to change them, and over curiosity and opening attachments and things that don't look right because they're not right.
While we're there, how often do you suggest that individuals change their passwords?
That varies. People go years without changing their passwords, and then they keep a big nice list at home, and they post it next to the computer or sticky notes at work, and I mean it's got security red flags all over it. But we're people, it is what it is. And answer your question, 6 months. 6 months, change it, maybe less, or maybe more often if you're so inclined.
And don't use the same password on your site.
Correct.
There's a lot of different ways to do that. I realize it is really hard to maintain. Right now, I think I'm carrying 188 passwords or something like that. And it does no good if you have different passwords on every site, but you have that written down someplace where somebody can get a hold of it. So, there's tricks you can use. Come up with patterns that I use this as a base, and then I put some number after it based on something that's on the web. There's a lot of different things you can do so that you still, as long as you can remember your pattern, but then the password is different on every site. So just everything that you can do to make it more and more complicated for people to get into your accounts, better off you are. You want to throw up roadblocks. You're never going to stop everybody, but you want to throw up as many roadblocks as you can.
Patrick, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to touch a little bit on that. I came to the city just about 2 years ago, and we've had some other things that we've had to address, but one of the things that we see, I think, is going to be a necessity for us, once we get a few things shored up, is we want to actually contract with somebody to actually conduct a penetration test in the city. So what they do is they actually have professional hackers, is what they're called, and they'll come out and they will do tests to see how vulnerable our network is, and then
I want to get that next one up. Professional hacker, that's good. Professional hacker.
I actually used to work with him in the private sector, and we went through this in the private sector through, it might have been EY, or it was one of the consulting firms that came down, and we had all kind of vulnerabilities in the network and in security, and we shored those up, and we did a much better job the following year, but it was a continual, it's a moving target, so to speak. So once we get a few things in place that we've been working on from an IT standpoint, that is one project that we're looking at. Another thing that we're trying to do is standardize on a Microsoft Office platform. We had people authenticating through Novell, some people authenticating through Active Directory, so we're trying to standardize on that. And then the applications that we're moving towards are .NET-based applications where that security will work. So to make it easier on the end user to only have to remember one password, but we also require a 90-day change for our passwords in the cities.
And I think it's not the elephant in the room. We talked about it, but Target, what happened with Target? If you could shed some light on the Target scam that occurred last year, that would be great. So what happened?
The FirstData was involved in that piece of business with the Target side, and we employed a task force, and we were rapid, obviously reacting. Target had their breach. Their hackers gained access to their systems through a vendor, their HVAC vendor, according to some of the media reports. Just so you know, I don't have direct sources to this, so I'm just reading this through the media. And what happened is their vendor that controls the temperatures of the stores clicked a link, which opened Pandora's box, or in the malware was able to gain access. From what I'm finding out, just through reading reports, is that the people were planning this. Obviously, it wasn't a coincidence. It happened on Black Friday. They had been in there, from what I hear, since March, early spring, planning that. So what happened? How did they gain all that access to that cardholder data as the cards were being swiped through and the charges being run? That's when the data was being pulled down. It wasn't a breach through a platform or processing. We're clear on that side. It was an internal Target breach that happened internally at the Target side. So picture this as you're swiping your card, that data is being pulled in. All of your data, your name, the expiration date, the card, address, is all layered in that magnetic stripe. And they're pulling that down, and that's what they use when they go to the black market and they sell that data. So that's what happened. Is that?
Oh no, yeah, definitely. And what? Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I was gonna ask. Because I've heard or read stories about in Europe they have chips on credit cards, and do you know if credit card companies are looking into additional safety measures for that?
They are. I talked about that prior to starting and kicking off the meeting today. EMV is coming. That's a part of the space that there's going to be a hardware change. Your cards are going to look much different. Overseas, they have had these cards for years, and it cut down on fraud 90%. So why is that important? The chip, instead of swiping a card, you will slide it in a slot. A lot of your larger retailers, you will see like a blue light on an open slot in the front versus the swipe on the side. You'll slide that card in, it will beep, you'll get a full read, you'll pull it out, and it will require a PIN number for every transaction, adopting the same methodology as an ATM cash withdrawal. If you have an ATM card and you don't have a PIN, it's useless. So that will essentially cut fraud instantly, and it's great for the merchants accepting cards as well as the card holders. So that will be mandated by October 2015. So the way we do credit card payments now is drastically going to change. You used to see issuing of credit cards by Q3, Q4 into the year. So the cards will look much different.
What about biometrics? Do you see us heading that direction anytime in the near future? Because you were talking about the tokens, and the whole idea is to make something that just can't be duplicated or can't be falsified. Biometrics, that's the idea. So do you see us seeing biometric information being run into this?
Just the way the whole panel said, it'll constantly be changing, but tokenization and then the introduction of EMV, hence the layered approach of security, that's what we're trying to bring to the table. So not so much on the biometric side, but what they're going to do is introduce different technology to help secure cardholder data and identities. That's all a part of this whole thing, not even credit card data, but your personal information is stored on there digitally. Yes, sir.
So in your opinion, was Target PCI compliant or not at the time, since apparently the HVAC system or the HVAC company had access to the PCI network? They did not have proper controls set in place to prevent that.
They probably had an opening on a porthole for them to get through, which was probably a direct IP address that they could get into their system, which was direct to them. Unfortunately, you had a vendor that clicked that link that opened up that malware, which they were able to gain access through. So the HVAC, do I think Target was compliant? Yes, I do think they were PCI compliant. But when you have someone that opens up a portal for someone to gain and put software on their system, that changed it all right there. But since we were doing the processing, we made sure the target was the PCI. So which that scope is constantly changing too. We're on PCI compliant version 3.0 right now.
So in cases like that, if your company is breached and someone like you has said that they are compliant, are they liable, or are you guys liable, or the bank's liable at that point? Who is liable for the...
It still falls back on the merchant. Yeah, it's still their responsibility because it's their systems running the cards.
Yeah. So you talked about the tokenization earlier and using the Cisco software in the transport part. So in Target's case, since it was on their system prior to the transport, the tokenization would not have been successful.
They didn't have it.
Okay. If it would have been there, though, would it have been able to protect the data?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So you mentioned that by October 2015, you're going to get away from the magnetic and get to this chip. For all the companies and nonprofits that use things like Square, is that going to be obsolete?
They're going to have to come up with a different hardware piece because the little cube that you're swiping, basically, if you ever looked at a card reader that you can plug into a smart device, it looks like if you remember cassette decks, it's the same kind of reader as a cassette deck that you're swiping that magnetic stripe against. So yes, it's definitely going to need a new peripheral. So mobile payment space is also going to change, most definitely.
To continue with his question, I also thought that the point of sale device, the thing that we actually swiped the card through, was what was infected with the malware. And so I thought they were catching the memory before anything could happen like tokenization. So they were catching the memory as cards were being swiped, they were picking that up, which would happen before tokenization happened. So in that case, tokenization wouldn't solve that problem, would it?
The tokenization piece of that, since it was happening at the swipe point, it's not even hitting our token piece, so it would not have, because basically they put that right at the checkout points.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that would have been a solvent, but it certainly would have helped, depending on when they were getting that data.
Great. Any questions? I have a question for you. As far as enforcing laws with e-security, how is that challenging, considering that things are changing often? What are some of the challenges with enforcing e-security laws?
Probably the biggest challenge so far has been knowledge. And I say that because whether we're dealing with academic institutions or corporations or retail, the know-how isn't always there. In other words, they report an incident at their school, at their college, at their company, or in some cases, many times, in someone's personal bank account. How could this happen? Our job is more on the reactive side in that case, and that is to find out electronically how this happened and who's responsible for it, whether it's civil or whether it's criminal. If it's bad business and it's civil, it goes right back to them and they hire attorneys. If it's criminal, if it's bad intent, malicious intent, some overt actions in support of that, that's really the definition of a crime, we pursue it. Our biggest problem has been the knowledge on the other end. It's been folks that, whether it be their own bank account or someone working at a company or someone working at a college, who does not follow proper safety protocols. And many times, take for instance a bank. We've dealt with those in the past, or title companies or real estate companies. The user within the office that is exploited, there are activities which are exploited. They may have opened a link, they may have had bad password security. There's no oversight many times. That's one of the biggest problems we have seen. No oversight of their management or ownership to make sure that IT security practices are followed and followed on a regular basis. So that tends to be, the education part of it tends to be our biggest problem that we run into. It's not as much on the investigative side. On the investigative side, the technology's out there. If we can bring in the right type of support professionals or agents with that background, we can track a lot of the stuff. It's digital fingerprints. They're all over. Encryption changes things quite a bit. That's been our second biggest challenge, although we have not found it. My colleagues would probably attest to that. It's not as prevalent as it we fear it could be. We're trying to stay on the front end of it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if the challenge is education on one side, how can people become educated? Are there, I would say online, it's like we use online for everything. But, you know, how is it that people can feel secure in what they're doing online and with internet security or electronic security? Like how are they being educated?
Okay, two ways. One is virtual and one is real world. I'll start with the virtual. The virtual is the easy part. You can Google, as you know, almost anything on correct security practices, and you can read up, memorize, and practice password security, attachment, know what malware is, those kind of things, know what Trojan horses are, and different viruses within your own computer systems, either personal or professional. Know what those are and know how to avoid them. That's the biggest start. That's actually the first start. Because if you know that as an individual, you carry those same practices to your business or to your university, wherever you happen to be working. And we talked about a few of those already as far as passwords and suspicious emails and attachments. That's the first part. The second part, when it comes to higher education or corporations on a macro level, when we start talking about security of servers and financial data, we've implemented nationally and as well here in Northern Ohio a program called InfoGuard. If anyone ever heard of that before? Okay, InfoGuard is a national program run by the FBI, and it is essentially bringing our private partners in with law enforcement to teach and keep them educated about cybersecurity. And it's INFRA, infragard.org is the site. You can always look at it. In Northern Ohio, we have a chapter, just like every state has chapters. Northern Ohio has a chapter. It's run by FBI Cleveland, our main office, and they meet quarterly in Richfield, up in Richfield at what we call POT. It's a Peace Officer Training Academy up there. And they also meet yearly at the FBI office downtown Cleveland. Here's the purpose of it. It's 450 members wide across Northern Ohio, and it is folks just like you see at this table. It's IT directors from various companies. It can be small business owners. It can be principals or teachers that were concerned about IT security in their school. We have people join as members, but they represent something. They represent, typically they represent a company or an academic institution, but they don't have to. They can be a citizen that says, I'd like to know more about cybersecurity. I'd like to join that chapter. And that chapter, in these meetings, they bring in speakers. They talk about the very things we're talking about now. A couple of interesting parts about the program is the FBI does limited background checks on all members, what we call law enforcement sensitive. It doesn't give them a secret or top secret classification, but what it does give them access to what we call law enforcement sensitive material, and that is a fancy name for intelligence products. Our cyber researchers go out and find the biggest problems in the cyber world right now and solutions, how to avoid them. They turn those literally into products, paper products, or what once were paper products and now electronic, and they put them on a portal that all members have username and password to, so they can always log into the Northern Ohio chapter of InfoGuard. What's the latest and greatest research out there? What's the intel? What's the FBI run into these days? What kind of testing they run against that, and how do I avoid it? So in addition to the physical meetings where everybody gets together, there's those kind of intelligence products, and hence the need for the limited background investigation.
Question for you. Having a public place like a library, how do you monitor the usage of the internet or what people can do, but allowing them to still have access as much as possible if they don't have a computer at home or whatever? Do you guys have a lot of protection here, or is there a monitoring system, or what are you guys doing to monitor the activity on the internet here in the library?
Well, being a librarian and proponents of freedom of information, we do not monitor anything. But there are a lot of things that we can put in place to protect you and our staff and our information without monitoring. One of the first things that we do is everything here is VLAN separated. So the public is not on the same, in essence, the same network. Now, it's not a different physical network, it's a different electronic network. But the public data never meets the staff data or the data that we use internally. We take a extreme efforts here to protect you when you're using the public side. For example, our Wi-Fi, we block all peer-to-peer connections. So first of all, somebody else on the network can't see your computer. I really recommend that anytime you walk in on a public network, one of the first things you do is hit that network connection and browse. You can see somebody else's computer, they can see yours. Now, you have firewalls, you have other ways to block them even if they can see you, but it's a first indicator of whether or not you're even exposed on their network. As far as the public computers here, we lock everything down with Windows policy. You can't run an exe, you can't, even if you click on that attachment that has some sort of active software in it that's trying to run, it simply will not run on our computers. But it's right up front. So we take extreme effort to protect both our own information and the public information. I will say, though, that we have, compared to some libraries, a fairly extensive IT department here. So it's always a good idea anytime you're on somebody's public network just to check these things, see what you can see and see what kind of exposure you may have. That's kind of what we do here.
Like, what are you looking for? Or how do you make sure you can block yourself so that somebody else doesn't see your computer?
Well, one of the things you can do is make sure that your firewall, your personal firewall, is turned on your computer. Windows has a personal firewall, Mac has a personal firewall, and if you're using a Linux box, you can download a piece of firewall software. So that's kind of step one. The other thing is make sure, and I know we all have home networks, and I don't know about you, but I share drives at home, and I share printers at home, and I share all that stuff. If you're going to be on a public network, it's worth the 5 minutes to go in and turn all your sharing off, just to make sure that those are not shared at all when you're in a public space. Those are the two simplest things. I can't say that will stop every hacker, but it's going to stop the majority of them, in the casual people. It's like everything else, I think. In many cases, hackers look for the weak link, and if you're not the weak link, then they may move on to another place. But we do try to block that stuff.
Quick follow-up on that. As far as Wi-Fi networks at home, we have found more times than not, it's about equal, but it's becoming a problem. Wi-Fi networks at home many people don't have a password to protect that, which is obscene or absurd as it sounds, they don't. So if you're using a Wi-Fi network at your house, it's very simple to set up those passwords for your iPad or your laptop or even your desktop. Make sure someone that drives down the street can't sit in front of your house and utilize your Wi-Fi network, because it's very simple to lock those down. And that avoids problems with these peer-to-peer networks. Does anyone not know what a peer-to-peer network is, or what they call P2P? Everybody does know? Okay. Those are a big problem with us, those peer-to-peer networks. Once was file sharing of music and video, this has now turned into pornography and child pornography. Those that don't have a secure Wi-Fi network, they can have the finger pointed at them unjustly because that's not secure.
So I hear that.
Yeah, so with the question that you would answer kind of at the end, I guess to continue on with that, it seems like there's a lot more money in cybercrime. There's a lot more profit to be made by criminals. What is the best way to increase the cost-benefit analysis for a company who's trying to protect themselves and not lose their money? That their product is not security, so they're trying to get business done and they don't really care about security most of the time. So what is the most efficient way to increase the cost to attackers?
The most effective and most efficient, cost-effective way to lock down the system.
Yeah,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Small business owners aren't really concerned with the security piece. So what's an effective, cost-effective way to lock down that system is the question.
Yeah, I mean, start at the beginning. Make sure you've got a firewall. If you've got any kind of business connectivity coming in, make sure your router or the front-end device has a firewall built into it. I mean, take the steps to protect all the way down through to the extent you can. If you have wired Wi-Fi, what you talked about putting passwords on it, the higher levels of security. We started with what they call web security, and now we're WPA and some of these other ones. as we've gone up, they've gotten more and more secure. Most people believe that web is basically will slow people down a little bit. I mean, it's fairly breakable these days. So, always try to be using the best security you can. Don't share something that doesn't need to be shared. On Wi-Fi networks, another step you can take is most Wi-Fi routers, from the simplest to the most sophisticated, will allow you to limit the number of connections. So if I know in my home I've got 2 computers, 2 iPods, and something else, and I've got 5 devices, limit my router to 5 IP addresses. And then that way the person that's coming on that's number 6 or number 7 doesn't even stand a chance of getting it. So I guess it's start at the top, start at the edge, and then keep working your way back until you get more and more and more secure. It also you have to look at your risk. If I'm storing any kind of accounting information or any information that can be turned to cash, I've got to spend more money to protect that than simply my letter that I wrote to my congressman or whatever. It's people don't necessarily want that type of information. They're looking for something that they can turn into something profitable. A little trick, you can do it in business, you can do it with a lot of things, credit cards. For online purchases, keep a credit card that's got a very low dollar amount and use that for online purchases, and don't expose maybe a credit card that you use for travel or may have a higher limit on. Don't expose that to the internet. So it's a matter of blocking and exposure. Each step that you take down the line just improves your chances of not being discovered.
Does it help at all with Wi-Fi to turn off the broadcasting of the network ID, or is that?
I believe it helps the cat against the casual hacker. There are devices that can find that even if it's not broadcast, because there still has to be a talk. But it's gonna probably stop the kids in the neighborhood or the kids in the next neighborhood over. But a serious hacker, it's going to necessarily stop. But it's one of those first attempts. Anybody else?
So I guess what I've seen when you were talking about starting at the edge devices, what I've seen though is now most of the stuff has transferred to being stuff like Zeus or CryptoLocker that is essentially phishing attacks. And it's really, really easy to customize phishing attacks now that are designed to get you to click on it, whether or not you think that you're susceptible to clicking on some link, and then you go to a drive-by site, and you've already bypassed all of your edge stuff. So how do you handle business owners who that's what they run into, is they're now getting their stuff encrypted by CryptoLocker and then being ransomed for it, or...
Well, I can tell you one of the things we've run into in regards to that very problem, and historically has been with small business owners, as recently as a month and a half ago. Not to sound too condescending to those that call us, but many times it's come down to common sense. And here's why I say that. They can employ as much technology as possible, but when common sense does not dictate, we have run into problems. Case in point, without revealing too much, individual who does business overseas, and many small companies these days do online, and are very profitable for it. But when dealing with a foreign entity, we have found that people who develop these long-term relationships get into a little bit of a lax, a little bit of a sense of ease, that every time they are back online with this individual, it's the same person. You talk about phishing, and for those that don't know, but if you don't know, we can talk about that. But the changing of an email address by a single letter has become very prevalent in business commerce that we have found in regards to the fraud. And I'm not talking about preventative security, I'm talking about criminals that have intruded. In this particular case, it was a relatively long-term relationship with the Chinese from an American company, and on one given day, one single letter in the email address that they were conversing back and forth was changed. The American business guy did not catch that and realized it was a slightly different email address, and continued. Now, granted, there was an intrusion. There was an intrusion that found those communications to begin with, so there is a security issue out there. But then the human psyche took over, and they never saw it. They never saw that small change, so they began to converse back and forth. Next thing you know, the fraudster, if you will, on the other end now had to figure out a way. How do I convince this guy to send money? When not to the regular bank he's always dealt with this guy, but with my bank, the fraudster's bank. And herein comes some of the social engineering that phishing is predicated on, and that is, hey, look, we're having a problem with my regular bank. Please remit the payment or the money overseas in the amount of $200 or $300 or $500,000 to this bank and this account number. And that's when the human has to take over. That should be the red flag. Why would they suddenly have a problem with the bank? Well, if you have a problem with that bank, I'm holding my money here in the States until the bank gets it fixed with the trusted entity I already have. By the time that call was made to the real vendor, they're like, I never sent that email to you. I never changed it. So it's a low-tech answer to a technical question that you're posing. Encryption is certainly a problem, but we're hoping to attack it both on the technical side you've heard over here, as well as the personal side.
On that point about email, I've gotten emails from colleagues who are sitting at the desk right next to me. It comes through from their email address, but it is obviously not from them. How is that streamed through and received?
Well, yeah, it is email spoofing, and I got one 2 days ago from two different friends. One of them is a retired FBI agent. I don't have the technical background to ascertain how that originally started, other than to know how it occurs once the attack is made, once the account is taken over. The majority of our statistics that we pushed out to the public, both locally and nationally, have come. Those email spoofs have occurred because malware was attached on someone, typically home computer. There have been some business account takeovers, but it usually starts with the home computer with that malware, and it can even get into something as disturbing as keystroke loggers, if you're familiar with those. That malware is attached, it tracks the various keys that I put. So they watch. When someone is watching the internet traffic, when you log into att.net or yahoo.com, they're going to their email, and they now know the username and password. They use that, they set up that account, and they get in the address book of all those, and they spoof it out to the entire book. And next thing you know, they're asking for money, and there's all kinds of scams that can start from that.
Any other questions with that?
So this is kind of off the topic of electronic security from the business perspective, but we saw in the news this week or last week the odd item of a baby monitor being taken over by somebody, and obviously they had their wireless network. But from a legal perspective, is there a repercussion for someone accessing a person's network? And I believe it was kind of set up where the crib was and started talking to the baby. The person who did that, if it can be tracked and found legally, is there really anything?
There's a state and federal wiretap law that would be considered illegal electronic intrusion. Run into a problem when you find commercially available software, and it does exist. We've had this come up in our office here 4 or 5 months ago. There is software you can put on your phone or your kid's phone for tracking, not just GPS tracking, but audio. And the parent can activate that. Ohio's a one-party state, so if you are communicating with a device that you purchased for your kid and you have control and custody over, you're permitted to do that. It does not allow you to activate any video surveillance on that end, nor does it permit you to intrude on any conversations you are not a part of. But we have run into that, and that software exists. People are trying to exploit that software so it turns into a video camera or it becomes a roving recorder wherever they take it, and therein lies a definite problem. But that technology or that case scenario is the same for the baby monitor when it's parties that are not privy to it.
Going to step back to some of the password things we're talking about here, a lot of this is it's on us. We got to be smart. We got to use common sense. But some of the new software, this isn't new. A lot of it, but the online-based, trying to think of how to describe it. I'm not tech savvy enough, but the LastPasses of the world, the PayPals of the world, where they claim, put all the information here. We'll take care of it. You don't have to worry about having to enter your personal credit card information. remember all these passwords. How secure are those? And I mean, I know I used to keep my passwords all in an Excel spreadsheet on my laptop. I got rid of all that and put some of them, on one of those online password protection deals, but I'm still a little uncomfortable knowing whether that's actually secure.
The only thing I will say is I try not to put all my eggs in one basket. If I'm using a system like that, there still is one password or one point that somebody can hack and get everything.
Right.
If somebody's going to hack me, I would rather they hack me and get one or two things that I can clean up. So to me, it's whether or not it's secure, not secure. I'm a firm believer that anything today is hackable.
Sure.
I mean, we can do 50% and 70% and 90% and 99%, but there is still going to be a percent or a 0.5% out there that the numbers get better and you have less chance, but it's always a possibility.
Sure.
And I would rather look at it from the standpoint that there's always a possibility and plan for worst case. So, don't put them all in one spot. Make sure they're all different. I have people that say, I have to write them down. So they write down the front half of the password here, and then they have something totally different that they really don't think that they're going to lose both ends at the same time, and they'll write the other half of the password down here. So anything you can do to separate, protect, make it so not all of your information is in one place, I would thoroughly recommend, no matter what the numbers tell us as far as what the security level is.
I'll tell you the other half, and that is we preach security and don't do this, but invariably people will. It's like telling kids not to drink and drive or take drugs or have premarital sex. Someone's going to do it, so you still have to educate. And I would say if you must put all your passwords, you're right, it's definitely not the best idea to put them all in one place. If you do two things in addition. Change your password every 90 to 120 days at the most, but you have to go back to that master list and change it, number one. And utilize a backup. So in other words, if you must, or if you think they need to, put them on an external drive at home and keep it safe. So that you have to take multiple steps to get to it. If you absolutely need your bank account information because you simply can't remember it. And then worst case scenario, if that's not convenient enough, and I hope it is to use the password keepers, wherein many people on the smartphones have the password keeper. Takes a password to unlock the phone, takes another password to utilize the app of the password keeper. Not perfect, but certainly better than writing them down. Because let's face it, everybody's going to take the path of least resistance at some point, so make it difficult. The problem with the last option is if someone gets access to that phone, they're going to get through your password keeper eventually, but it's a layer.
So I can say something about the LastPass in particular. The purpose of that is so you don't have all of those passwords that you're trying to remember a whole bunch of different ones, like you were saying. And the other thing that when you do with that, you have the master password, but you can also turn on two-factor authentication. So you have a secondary place that there's something else that you have to get into that. And as you're talking about passwords, a lot of these new accounts, you can set up two-factor authentication, which makes a whole lot of difference because then it's not just one password. It's a second thing, something on your phone or something else that you need to go to a second place to be able to access it.
I think the key in what you're pointing out, that's for LastPass. You pointed out the tokens. We've talked about it with the edge devices. It's layers. The more layers you can put in, the more things you can do to make it so that it takes multiple steps. I mean, even on a smartphone, most of the smartphones are 4 digits? So in all reality, 10,000 numbers. Some kid can set, unless you've got the lock on there that says after so many attempts I'm going to wipe the phone and be done with it. It may take them 2 weeks, but they can sit there for 2 weeks and go through number by number, and sooner or later they're going to be on your phone. So the more layers you can have, the more steps you can have, and the more steps that the password or the token or the letter is not the same all the way through the steps, better off.
And also to add to that, we said layers, technology on the new iPhones have the fingerprint identifying to get into that too, outside of the PIN. So that's technology driving security too. Another layer.
So when we're talking layers, security, education, human factor, I look to you and I say, with the large population that you have of employees in the city, with folks from clerical administrative all the way up to the mayor and council, how do you control and manage not writing it down on a Post-it note and protecting that network?
Let's ask the mayor.
We do find a lot of that, actually, since I've been there these 2 years. We found quite a bit of that. I have to give the team credit that was there, that's been handling this. They had things locked down, but it was kind of a antiquated approach. So essentially, what they did to lock our network down is they statically addressed every device. So without that static IP address, you couldn't just come in with another machine and try and connect to the network. That's a little dated as far as the approach, but it worked for them. The other thing that they've done is we don't have wireless access points in the city. That creates an issue because we've, some of the management, they may want to, we've got, I'm just throwing out a number here, I think we have 17 to 19 locations, but some of those locations have multiple buildings. Well, if you take your laptop and you go somewhere, you can't connect to the network because the subnet that you were addressed for is different than this location out here. So it's really created some issues. So on the one hand, they've really handled the security point, but they've made it difficult to get anything done on the other end. So we're working through that and trying to address that. We're moving to a DHCP address setup and moving to Active Directory and internet so we can pull those IP addresses. And the thought process behind that is that eventually we're going to layer wireless access points and we're going to VLAN that so that we separate that out. So as far as answering that question, the only thing we can do is, again, we try to enforce that every employee changes their passwords every 90 days. But we've been in departments where a few people have like master lists of all the addresses, and we tell them that they're not supposed to be doing things like that, and it's just an everyday battle that we have to deal with. Does that answer the question?
Are there any questions that we haven't addressed today?
Well, I had a more general question about phishing. So that seems like an type of attack that you can't engineer away. But you don't hear about it much in the news, probably because it doesn't affect millions or hundreds of thousands of people at once, like the Target and Heartbeat stuff does. Is phishing attacks still a major issue for security?
Sure. Yeah, I think it is definitely still a major issue. One of the things, or one of the approaches that we take from an IT standpoint is we feel we can't ever communicate enough. So when we first get notification of that, we try and send out mass email to everybody that's in the cities as far as letting them know that these are the things to look for. A lot of those phishing attacks, or you can actually go out and look those up on like snopes.com, and you can prove those out that they're not legit. So again, we just feel that we try to over communicate to the departments when we come across issues like that, but we still feel it's a definite issue out there.
One of the things that we do here is we've made it very well known that we will never chastise you or embarrass you for sending IT an email and letting us look at it before you do anything to it. And then what we do is we always go back to the user and say, okay, look at this email. Here are the things that are sure signs that here's some secondary. One of the easiest things to do is there's almost always a link in these things. Don't click on it, but if you hover your mouse over the link, you will see, it will pop up down in the lower left-hand corner what the actual URL is, even though the link may say www.starklibrary.org. It may actually be going to someplace in West Africa or in Alaska or whatever else. And so just do the basic checks. Hover over some of the links and see if they're going to the wrong place, or look for the misspelling thing. and I'm not the best speller in the world, but if you start seeing emails or phishing emails or even things that look like they came from your bank or website and there's spelling or grammar errors in them, chances are it's not. So it's just some of that common sense thing. Really, don't become complacent. I think as human beings we're trusting, and I think we trust too much sometimes in this. Be sure to question it. I get emails all the time that are true business, and I don't know whether they're fact or not. So there's a phone number in there. Instead of calling that phone number, I'll call the home office and ask for that person. If they don't know who that person is, that phone number is probably not. So just all these little things that maybe are just common sense, just be a little less trusting. So.
Any other questions?
So one point I was reading an article, it's been a while ago, about the psychology of why things are misspelled, and from what I understood, they said stuff is purposely misspelled in emails like that because they're targeting people who are going to be more susceptible to actually following through the entire process. They don't want to spend the time to go through people who are going to fall out of the process because they're going to be smart enough to realize. So they're specifically targeting people who don't realize that. So that was the one question. And the other question was, at the very beginning we talked about passwords and the laziness that people often have with passwords. How do you address vendors who are lazy in their development of their applications and their processes that only provides you the ability to have an 8-character password, or that banks in particular I know have an issue with it. They don't let you have multiple accounts or multiple user accounts tied to one account. So my wife and I need to share an account. Well, we don't want to have the same password, but we have to have the same password and the same security questions and all that stuff attached to it that are supposed to be customized to you instead of letting there be multiple user accounts tied to that one account. How do we put pressure on those type of organizations to allow that would offer more security?
We have given similar advice to companies that struggled with that, and it wasn't what they wanted to hear, but we're not always in the business of saying what someone wants to hear, obviously, and that was shop around. We've told these folks who are dealing with vendors, particularly when they're overseas, you don't like their security procedures, you move on. It's very simple, despite what they might tell you, for those vendors to change that password authentication or what type of password they will accept or won't accept. And if the American vendor, if the American supplier is important enough to them that they give them that ultimatum, change it or we move on to the next guy, they'll do it. Problem is no one ever does that. It's their policy. Can't really change their policy. If we want that material, we got to go through. It's not the case at all. You throw it out there. Great product, love your prices. You're going to have to make it more secure for us. And they didn't always want to hear it, but it's worked. And it's more difficult, you're right, with the banks. The bigger the bank, the tougher that is. But banks, even banks now are becoming so competitive. There's wiggle room in there. There's bargaining in there when it comes down to security because they have an entire security department themselves. It's far easier with the vendors to say, look, keep it simple, keep it human. We're moving on if your security isn't better because there's other products out there, other companies that do this the same.
And I would have to agree with that because, especially for the banking and financial standpoint, I've not run into that. My wife and I, we deal with multiple banks and credit unions. She has her accounts, I have my accounts, so they're linked, but she has her own username and password and security questions that she logs in with, and the same for me, but yet we can see each other's accounts. So I would have to agree, if you're not getting that from your bank, I would definitely shop around and look for a bank that offers that.
Any idea on, I'm sure you know this because you're sharp, the FBI, the Bureau's investigations, active investigations, obviously you guys are more and more leaning towards this kind of investigation stuff as opposed to bank robberies and things like that. We're kind of stats-wise, where are we at in terms of percentage of active investigations or investigations overall in terms of workload does electronic crime represent? And then the follow-up, where are you finding your agents on the side of doing this kind of investigation? Where do those folks come from, and how do you train them?
Okay, first part first. Upwards of 90%, probably well into the 90s, of our cases, including drug traffickers and gang investigations, are dealing with computers. and are dealing with social media. And we're on a number of those sites watching some of these folks. Historically, it was only bank fraud cases that involved some computer. It wasn't even computer intrusions then. Cyber crimes weren't to that extent. The extent of cyber crimes or cyber involvement was what computers were used in the course of a bank fraud. We're finding them across all cases, first and foremost. We're finding less intrusions, if you will, hackers that are looking to exploit your personal data or a company's data. We're finding those, and we have a number of cases for those. But the bigger involvement we're finding with computers are using computers to facilitate drugs, facilitate guns. That's on the violent side. On the white-collar side, if you will, we're finding them in public corruptions, in chat rooms, encrypting data to some extent, but not as much because the general public doesn't know a lot about encryption. But we have developed forensic cyber laboratories, and we have them here as well, that every computer now that we take, and we say this publicly, every iPod, every phone, every computer, we do a forensic examination of them. We have to have a warrant to do this, and we have no problem writing those up, and it essentially takes a picture of that, images that hard drive, where we can remove that media now, and then go through it and see where someone went on their website history. That's across all cases. And again, it used to be just on the bank fraud side. You add into that the hackers that are emulating from overseas, or folks that get a hold of a Russian or Chinese intelligence service that are trying to get trade secrets from local companies, whether it be big ones like Diebold or Timken, or small ones. If you're dealing with just wire transfers of a real estate company, it's all relevant. Those are the kind of things that turn into wire fraud cases or bank fraud cases of which a computer is part of. So if you want to get real basic stuff, just with the gangbangers that we call them, I think you wouldn't believe some of the records that these guys are keeping on those. And when I was running around in high school, no one knew anything about computers, obviously. They were barely around. Nowadays, even the thugs on the street know how to work a lot of this stuff to keep their data. And their phones are like a gold mine for that kind of stuff. As to find, not to mention Facebook and videos and what they don't think anyone sees, it's amazing. But where we find these agents, another good question. There was a time in the FBI, and I'll keep this short, but it was accountants and lawyers is all that J. Edgar Hoover wanted to hire. And that's what it was. The diversification of criminals has gotten such that we are pulling agents from all walks of life. Sales professionals, teachers, military, former cops, former military officers, and cyber crimes. In direct relation to your question, we have a concerted hiring effort for computer scientists, computer information scientists, programmers, things along those lines. So we are recruiting those directly from colleges because the 3-year work experience that you must have to apply with the FBI in addition to your degree is waived for those folks because it's considered a critical need. What we are finding, though, is the best applicants have both. They've got the degree plus the 3 years of work experience that we're taking from security consulting firms, IT departments, a host of different places. And it's actually been good for us. It's educated the rest of us by having these young folks that have that kind of expertise.
You talked about some of the things you guys are going to try to protect from that and some of the new technologies that are coming out. You talked about the changing one letter in the email address. What are some other scams, or I guess in your experience, where do you see some of these threats going potentially? I know it's kind of scary, but I mean, do you see where different criminals or different hackers are going with this in terms of what they're trying to access or take advantage of?
Yeah, for the most part, they are trying to pull data and ultimately money, because that's what it's all coming down to overseas accounts. They're trying to remove it from the American banking system with your identities onto offshore accounts and then creating new identities for those. That's essentially, all these scams are generally, these aren't guys that are sitting in Madison, Wisconsin, or even Dallas, Texas, in big call centers and trying to collect this. There are unsuspecting middlemen around the U.S., much like the old drug trade. Gets the drugs from Mexico, gives to this guy, and ultimately ends up in Canton. That process is short, just like the drug trade has short. Now, those folks, those computer hackers are overseas, and they're posing as a number of different people, and they're using phishing exercises or malware with keystroke loggers, etc. But ultimately, in answer to your question, where is it all going? They're trying to assume identity or hack into your identity, pull money, literally, from your accounts and or your credit rating, and create new accounts overseas under false names. And they're not using all those. You can't possibly use 150 identities, but one of these guys are selling them in mass quantities to Eastern Europe and North Africa, and maybe some even in the United States, but it's being distributed worldwide because the internet is just a vast amount. But again, in answer to your question, it's designed to acquire identities, access to financial accounts. It's all about the dollar. Create new identities with those and sell them. Scary.
Yeah.
Really.
I got a question to ask you on that. Do you agree that one of the best ways to protect your identity that way, this is something my wife and I have talked about doing, is actually locking down our credit reports to where you can't, and I think the state of Ohio, there's a number of states do that, where you can't take out any credit. So if your identity was compromised, would that protect you and keep you from somebody actually making financial gain on your identity?
Yeah, you can do that as a credit lock to the four major credit bureaus: TransUnion, Equifax, the other four out there. Experience. You can put a, I don't know that credit lock is the word they use, but it's a credit watch. It's a credit lock. Yeah.
Credit lock, I thought it was like $10 per
Life lock?
agency.
Well, no, LifeLock's a different thing, but just strictly through the credit companies, yes, you can. So if anyone ever gets your social security number or your name and date of birth, and they try to open up a new credit card or a new line of credit, or they try to get a car loan or anything along those, you're right, it'll all come back to you. And they'll have to speak with you personally. It can't be anything electronic. They'll have to get you on the phone. You have to authenticate it a different way, which you will set up in advance as to how it's going to be authenticated. And before you give approval, hey, you realize your card's being used at Macy's in Lagos, Nigeria, or in Dallas, Texas, etc., because they may have sold that.
No, absolutely. I think the downside to that is, though, if you want to buy a car or you want to take out a home loan, you have to pay them to lift that lock in order to get credit.
I don't know that you have to pay to get it lifted. I think you have to pay for the service in general. I've not heard that you have to pay every time you say, no, that's my wife or that's my daughter at school, that one's authorized. And again, it's not every time they use, it's every time they try to open a new account. As opposed, I misspoke, it's not so much that they got your own credit card. If you scan your own credit card at Target, they're not going to be calling you. You're the one using it to open new accounts.
I think just to add, I'm sorry, I think it's called a hawk alert, but you would have to call the credit agencies, because as we open accounts, we have to authenticate the individual's identity, because we're wiring money, we're moving money electronically on our side. So when we open new merchant accounts due to the Patriot Act, we're bound to that as well. A lot of individuals have placed that type of hold on their credit reports, and it's called a hawk alert. We have to get that. So what I do on my side to open a merchant account is I have to get their social security card and their identity or their ID and submit that with my documentation to open.
And I was going to expand out on a personal level. A lot of credit cards anymore, I know my credit union that I use, I have alerts set on all my cards. And if it's over a certain amount or it meets certain price, I get an immediate text. I know. Now, that's still a little bit after the fact, but still that first trigger. The other thing is I don't know about you, I get real complacent about bill time, paying time. I just want to get stuff out of here. Look at your bills and look at your bills online. Most individual attempts to get a credit card or get information, they'll start pinging your card. And they'll ping your card with a little temporary charge of $1.27, and then they don't put it through. But what they want to do is they want to see if that's you, if that's a valid account and all that. And so you start seeing $1, $10, $9 charges coming on your account and going off and coming on your account. Call your bank right away. Almost every bank will immediately suspend that credit card and send you another one. So it's got to watch. You just got to watch.
I know to add to that with the alert, because what I have with my bank is that not only do I get the alert, but when someone tries to add a charge that I have not authorized, my bank will call me and tell me, hey, did you authorize this? And so even before somebody even tries to charge something, because I just had a recent attack on my cards just recently, and so before they even could get anywhere,
a bank was calling me saying, hey, did you make this purchase?
But, and you may be able to talk about this a little bit, how do we balance that with the other side? I'm now doing all my bill pay on my bank account. I called up my landlady and said, can I have your routing number and your bank number so I can automatically deposit your check? And she just gave me her routing number and her bank number. And I mean, yeah, but I mean, we're living in that world where we expect the free exchange. I mean, where do we stop and where do we, you don't give out any personal information to somebody?
Unfortunately, it's all discretion. In her case, I wouldn't do that. And I think that's insane. The smaller the organization, the smaller the entity, the less likely you should see that kind of trust. The larger the entity, larger the corporation, there's more security in place, there's more departments and secure sites and whatnot to do that. But, oh, that's a big problem. Yeah, when it comes to landscaping and things like that, yeah, just do electronic check. I won't do it.
Well, I know there was a thing going around in the news a little while ago. People stealing checks. What they're doing was they were stealing the mail before it went out. Because if somebody's paying something by check by mail, if you grab the check, well, maybe you can't cash that check, but you now have a routing number and account number. And you can authenticate. So I think what you have to do is just be vigilant. Whatever you do, don't assume that it's secure. Don't assume that somebody else is watching out for you. Watch out for yourself.
I was going to ask for parting words and advice, but it sounded like the overall theme is common sense here. It's just stay protected and if alert, get educated, but mostly just protect yourself, like you were saying. So if there aren't any more questions out of one more.
Quick question to follow up on that. Are there any resources you would recommend for getting educated or helping friends or parents or other family members get educated on how to stay safe?
Can I take that one first? The public library offers free courses. We issue the Start Scene. They're also on our website, and we do courses not only in cyber protection, but protection of your kids. We have a whole series of what I would call web sense kind of things. They don't go real deep, but they'll definitely get you started, and then we can point you to other resources that we have either here or get them up for you. So and they're free, so it's a good place to start.
So, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Of course, can we give a hand clap for our... Thank you guys so much for what you shared today, and thanks for spending, I don't know, some of you probably your lunch hour with us today. So, on behalf of Start,